The lobby was quiet. Too quiet. The kind of quiet that makes even the polished marble floors seem to echo. People were walking past, checking their phones, murmuring in hushed tones. The chandelier above flickered with sunlight, refracted through the massive glass windows like 1,000 tiny stars. And then she came. They heard him. "My dad, he's dying." The scream shattered the calm like glass breaking in slow motion. 6-year-old Leah Warren bolted through the revolving doors, her tiny legs moving faster than any grown-up could keep up with. Her white dress, torn at the hem, fluttered behind her like a flag of panic. Hair plastered to her forehead with sweat and tears. Her small hands trembled as they reached toward the first familiar figure she saw, the janitor, Daniel Carter. He was bent over a mop bucket, meticulously wringing out a rag. He didn't look up at first. The sound of a child screaming was not unusual in this building. Parents often brought their children in to wait while they finished deals, ran errands, or checked into one of the executive suites. But this voice, this raw, piercing panic, made Daniel freeze. Leah ran straight past the security guard who shouted, "Stop her!" Past the receptionist who tried to intervene, past the people frozen in disbelief at the scene unfolding. No one could reach her. No one could stop her. "Mr. Daniel, please, he's dying." "My dad, they beat him. You have to help him." Daniel's hand stilled on the mop handle. His gray eyes lifted slowly, taking in the small, trembling figure gripping his uniform like a lifeline. For a moment, nothing happened. And then something inside him shifted. The precise, controlled calm he always maintained, the mask of invisibility he wore every day, cracked. The lobby around him disappeared. He didn't see the marble floors, the glass doors, the crystal chandelier. He saw only the child. The urgency, the life or death moment that demanded immediate action. Daniel had never been a janitor by choice. That identity was a cover, a self-imposed exile. Once he had been someone else, a man who saved lives, not just in hospitals or clinics, but in the worst places imaginable. War zones, car crashes, collapsing buildings. Now, for the first time in years, that man had a reason to re-emerge. Leah's small hands were shaking. Her lips trembled as she tried to speak. Please don't let him die. I can't lose him." Daniel crouched down to her level, and in that moment, she wasn't a child screaming in a lobby. She was a beacon. The desperation, the innocence, the pure trust in him. It pierced through years of buried guilt, of nights replaying mistakes he thought he could never fix. Who did this? "Where is he?" Daniel asked, his voice calm but edged with authority, the kind that made people listen without question. They came to the house," Leah stammered, words tumbling over one another. "Some men. And they hit him. He said something. I don't know, but he's not moving." The security guard finally reached them, panting. "Miss, you need to step back." Leah shook her head violently. "No! He's the only one who can help him." Daniel's heart clenched. The child's faith in him was absolute. And despite the mop, the uniform, the long hours of invisibility, he felt a surge of recognition. He wasn't invisible anymore. Not when a life was at stake. He grabbed his jacket from the cart and slipped on the gloves tucked in his pocket. Not the janitor's gloves, but surgical gloves he kept for emergencies. The receptionist, finally gathering her courage, blurted, "Mr. Carter, wait. You can't just—" Daniel's eyes were sharp, unwavering. "Lead me to him. Now." The building suddenly seemed to contract around them. Every echo of footsteps, every murmur of conversation, faded as they raced down the service corridor and into the elevator. Leah clutched his hand, gripping tightly as though letting go might mean losing everything. Inside the elevator, Daniel could hear the child's rapid breathing. He didn't speak, didn't comfort her with words because right now, action mattered more than words. But his mind was running through everything he knew. Protocol, trauma response, triage. In an emergency, seconds mattered. Leah finally spoke between sobs. "Please, don't let him die." "He's my dad. I can't live without him." Daniel's eyes softened. "I won't let him die. I promise." It was a promise he hadn't made in years. Not to anyone. And for the first time he felt it fully. Not as a fleeting thought, not as a buried instinct, but as a commitment that burned through every cell in his body. The elevator dinged at the ground floor. Daniel led the way, Leah clinging to him, their pace urgent but controlled. They burst through the doors of the garage, and the smell hit him first. Gasoline, dust, and something else. Metallic blood. Cecilia Warren, the CEO, lay on the ground, barely conscious. Bruises marred her face, a cut opened along her temple, and her hand trembled uselessly beside her briefcase. Papers were scattered, one of them partially soaked with blood. Daniel knelt beside her immediately, checking pulse, breathing, responsiveness. Laya watched, wide-eyed. "Dad! Dad!" "Please," she whispered. Daniel didn't answer. He didn't need to. His hands moved quickly, methodically, clearing the airway, stabilizing the neck, checking circulation. Every movement was precise, every second accounted for. The janitor identity had vanished. The trauma surgeon, the man who saved lives in places no one else could, had returned. Yet even in the intensity of the moment, he kept glancing at Laya, acknowledging her presence. The child's gaze anchored him, reminded him why he acted. This wasn't just about protocol. This was personal. "Call 911, he instructed firmly. The security guard fumbled with his phone, dialing as Daniel worked. The sound of sirens faintly in the distance began to rise, but Daniel didn't falter. He adjusted Cecilia's posture, applied pressure to the bleeding wound, whispered reassurances she couldn't fully comprehend. Time blurred. Seconds stretched into eternities. And through it all, Laya never let go of his hand. She didn't cry, she couldn't. There was too much at stake. She just watched, waited, and believed. Finally, the paramedics arrived, rushing forward, their faces registering shock at the scene. "Who did this?" one asked. Daniel stood, removing the gloves slowly, the calm in his expression unshaken. "Some men who didn't count on me being here," he said, voice low, but carrying the weight of authority that silenced all questions. Laya finally exhaled. Her grip loosened, but only slightly. "Will he be okay?" she asked, voice barely above a whisper. Daniel looked down at her, a faint smile tugging at the corner of his lips. "He will be. Because you brought me here, and I don't let people die when I can help them." For a moment, the lobby, the garage, the world outside, all of it faded. It was just them. A child who believed and a man who finally believed in himself again. And in that instant, Daniel Carter wasn't a janitor. Not anymore. He was a hero. The kind the world didn't see coming. The kind that could change everything. As Cecilia was lifted onto the stretcher, Daniel's eyes scanned the garage. Somewhere in the shadows, the men who had attacked her were still lurking. And in that split second, he realized this wasn't over. Not yet. The fight had just begun. The sirens faded into the distance, leaving only the heavy echoes of footsteps and murmured questions behind. Yet the garage remained tense, charged with the remnants of adrenaline and panic. Daniel Carter stood at the edge, his hand still shaking slightly, not from fear, but from the intensity of what had just occurred. People stared at him. The security guards, paramedics, even the building staff, all of them had seen a janitor rush a 6-year-old to save her father, but no one had yet grasped the depth of what had happened. To them, Daniel had acted heroically. But how could they know the truth? How could anyone? Daniel had been just a janitor for the last 5 years. A man who pushed mops, cleaned floors, and emptied trash bins. Invisible, forgotten, overlooked. And yet, in that brief moment, he had done what few doctors could have done under the same pressure. He had saved the life of a billionaire CEO with nothing but his instinct, skill, and courage. But to understand why Daniel moved with such precision, why his hands didn't tremble while checking a pulse or applying pressure to a wound, one had to know his past. Daniel wasn't always a janitor. Not by choice. Once he had been Dr. Daniel Carter, one of the most sought-after trauma surgeons in the country. From the emergency rooms of downtown hospitals to disaster zones ravaged by earthquakes, Daniel's hands had saved countless lives. He had been the man who rushed into burning buildings when no one else dared, who performed surgeries on collapsing streets, who had seen death staring directly into the eyes of the helpless and fought it tooth and nail. It had been a different life. A life filled with accolades, awards, and recognition. People had called him brilliant, fearless, unstoppable. But then, tragedy struck. A personal loss so deep it forced him to abandon it all. The memory of that night surfaced unbidden. The screams, the flashing lights, the shrill sound of sirens and the final, haunting silence of his own daughter's hospital room. He had held her tiny hand as she took her last breath. A motherless child, a shattered family, a man crushed under grief he could not bear. Daniel had walked away from everything. Medicine, fame, responsibility, gone. And he had chosen invisibility, living as a janitor, cleaning floors while keeping his skill hidden. He had wanted to disappear from the world, to disappear from himself. But life has a way of dragging us back. And sometimes, the universe selects the perfect moment to remind you who you really are. When Laya had burst into the lobby screaming, Daniel had felt that reminder deep in his bones. The child's panic, the terror in her voice. It was a call he couldn't ignore. The same instincts that had saved countless lives came alive again, sharper than ever. Now, standing in the garage, he felt the familiar rhythm return. The rapid assessment of vital signs, the calculation of risk, the precise motions required to stabilize a patient. Every action was methodical, almost instinctual. The paramedics arrived. But even as they took over, Daniel remained at Cecilia Warren's side, giving concise instructions, directing them on how to maintain her airway, how to handle her injuries. A security officer whispered, "How did you—" "You're just a janitor." Daniel didn't answer immediately. His eyes never left the patient. He didn't need to. The truth would reveal itself soon enough, and when it did, it would shock everyone. Because this wasn't the first time he had saved someone under impossible circumstances. Earlier that week, a man had collapsed in the building's lobby from a heart attack. Daniel had been nearby, unnoticed, and had performed CPR until paramedics arrived. No one had known it was him. They had assumed a random passerby had helped. But he had been there, silently, expertly, anonymously. The reason he remained a janitor was twofold. Invisibility allowed him to live without being recognized, and it gave him access to situations others overlooked. People trusted the quiet, unassuming man. They didn't anticipate extraordinary skill behind a mop cart, and that gave Daniel an edge. Now, watching Cecilia being lifted onto the stretcher, he felt the familiar thrill of purpose mixed with the sharp pang of memory. It had been too long since he had saved a life, and the stakes had never been higher. He turned to Laya, crouching to her level again. She looked up at him, her small face etched with worry, tears streaked down her cheeks. You can really save him?" she asked, her voice trembling. Daniel allowed himself a small, almost imperceptible smile. "I've done it before. And I'll do it again." She clutched his hand tighter. "I knew you would. I just knew it." Her innocence, her absolute trust, reminded him why he hadn't completely shut down. Beneath the grief, beneath the self-imposed exile, he had never truly stopped caring. There was always someone out there who might need him. And in Laya's eyes, he saw that need clearly. Meanwhile, whispers began to ripple through the building staff. "Did you see that?" one asked. "The janitor. He actually saved her!" Another shook his head. "I thought he just mopped floors. He's—" "Amazing." Daniel ignored them. The moment was over, for now. His focus remained on the next steps, the fallout, and the unknown attackers who had struck the Warren home. Because saving Cecilia Warren was only the beginning, he had to anticipate what came next. The threat, the investigation, the potential danger to the child who had brought him here. He had to be prepared, and most importantly, he had to remain unseen in the chaos that would inevitably follow. As paramedics wheeled Cecilia away, Daniel helped Laya steady herself. She leaned against him, her tiny body shaking, but her eyes bright with gratitude and awe. "You were like a superhero," she whispered. Daniel chuckled softly, but there was a shadow in his smile. "Not a superhero, just someone who knows what to do when it matters most." Laya's eyes widened. "But you're supposed to be a janitor." "Not a doctor." "That's just my cover," Daniel said quietly. "Sometimes the world needs people to hide in plain sight." The notion hung in the air, heavy with mystery and intrigue. Those words alone were enough to make everyone around start questioning what they thought they knew about him. And for Daniel, it was a reminder invisibility had served him well, but heroism had a way of revealing itself, no matter how much one tried to hide. The building staff began to murmur more loudly now, piecing together the spectacle they had just witnessed. Security cameras had captured every moment, from Laya's desperate sprint through the lobby to the precise actions Daniel had taken to stabilize her father. Social media was already buzzing with posts about the janitor who saved the billionaire. Within hours, videos and images would circulate, each view further amplifying the shock factor, and yet Daniel didn't care. Public recognition had never mattered. What mattered was the life he had just saved and the trust he had earned from a child who believed in him completely. Still, there was danger. The attackers hadn't disappeared. They had been brazen enough to strike at one of the wealthiest men in the city. And now they had witnessed firsthand that the family wasn't defenseless, that a single janitor could intervene where others might fail. Daniel knew he had to prepare, strategize, protect. The hidden identity, the skill, the edge, everything would be tested in the coming hours. He glanced down at Laya again, seeing the relief and admiration in her eyes. She didn't know it yet, but she had just brought a fallen hero back into the world, and Daniel realized with a strange mix of awe and fear that this was only the beginning. Because saving Cecilia Warren was not just an act of skill. It was a spark that would ignite a chain reaction, one that would challenge his hidden identity, his past, and the dangerous men who had dared to strike at the heart of the Warren family. And Daniel Carter, the janitor, the hidden trauma surgeon, was ready. The revelation had already begun. The building staff, the paramedics, the child, everyone had witnessed a glimpse of the extraordinary behind the ordinary. The shock would ripple far beyond this garage, and for Daniel, that ripple meant one thing: the past was catching up, and the present was demanding action. As Daniel and Laya exited the garage, he noticed something in the shadows. Two men standing silently, watching, evaluating. They hadn't left. They hadn't given up. And Daniel understood instantly. The fight was far from over. Not only did he have to protect the Warren family, but he also had to confront the ghosts of his own past. The night air was heavy, almost oppressive, as Daniel walked back through the empty corridors of the Warren building. The adrenaline of the garage incident had faded, leaving a hollow ache in its place. His hands still smelled faintly of antiseptic and fear, and the echo of Laya's desperate cries lingered in his mind like a haunting refrain. He needed a moment alone, a moment to breathe. But more than that, he needed to confront a memory he had buried for years, one that had forced him to abandon the life he had once known. It had started with hope. Years ago, Daniel Carter had been the pinnacle of his profession. At 28, he had been a trauma surgeon renowned for his precision under pressure. In the emergency room, where every second counted and lives hung by threads, Daniel thrived. He could sense a body's fragility as if it spoke directly to him. He could move through chaos with a calmness that bordered on supernatural. Patients survived because he understood fear, chaos, and pain, and he had mastered all three. But the brilliance of a surgeon's hands cannot protect against life's cruelest twists. He had a family then. A small, fragile happiness, a wife, Miriam, and a daughter, Emily, who had just turned 6. She had been a bright, laughing child with wide eyes that saw the world in color when adults only saw shadows. Daniel had loved her with a ferocity that frightened him at times, a love that defined him. He had promised her the world, and then it all shattered. It had been a seemingly ordinary evening. Daniel had returned home late from the hospital, exhausted but buoyed by the relief of a patient saved against impossible odds. He had entered the house, hearing the soft laughter of Emily and Miriam from the living room. The sight of them, together, unbroken, had filled him with warmth he hadn't felt in years. But that warmth had been an illusion, a fragile veneer that life would tear away in a single, cruel stroke. A fire. It started in the kitchen, a faulty appliance, a spark, a flame licking upwards faster than anyone could react. Daniel remembered the smoke first, thick and suffocating, and the panicked screams of Miriam calling his name. The world had turned into chaos, a blur of heat, smoke, and screaming. He had tried to reach them, to save them, but the fire moved faster than his hands could. He remembered Emily's tiny hand slipping from his grasp, Miriam's final cry, and then the darkness, when the fire was finally extinguished. When the smoke cleared, Daniel had found himself alone. His family gone. His world obliterated. It was a grief so intense, it had hollowed him out from the inside. Daniel had survived only because he had no choice, but surviving wasn't living. Not anymore. The brilliance of his surgical skill, the accolades, the fame, it all felt meaningless in the void of loss. So he had walked away, from medicine, from recognition, from everything. He had abandoned the life he had built, leaving only the shell of a man behind. Daniel Carter became invisible, a janitor, someone who could mop floors without facing the piercing reminders of what he had lost. For years, he had convinced himself that invisibility was protection, that by hiding in plain sight, he could avoid grief, avoid reminders, avoid failure. But grief, Daniel realized, doesn't vanish. It lingers, it waits, and sometimes it finds you in the faces of others. Laya's cries, Cecilia's peril. It was like staring into a mirror of his past. That same helplessness, that same terror, had once defined his nights. And now, decades later, it demanded a response. He had always believed that leaving medicine was a form of penance, a way to atone for the perceived failures of the past. But standing in the Warren garage, helping a child save her father, Daniel felt the stirrings of purpose returning. A purpose not tied to fame or recognition, but tied to life itself. He thought back to Emily, his daughter, her small, fragile hand, her laughter, her curiosity, the way she would curl up on his lap when storms frightened her. He could still hear her voice sometimes, in the quietest moments, whispering reminders of love, of trust, of loss. The truth was unbearable. He had abandoned her. And while the fire had been accidental, the failure to protect her haunted him endlessly. Every life he saved in the hospital after that felt like a hollow substitute for the one he couldn't save. Every thank you from a patient was tinged with the knowledge that no accolades could repair the hole inside him. And yet, in Laya he saw a spark, a chance to do right, to heal, to intervene when it mattered most. Not to replace Emily, never to replace her, but to honor the life that had been taken from him by saving another. This was why Daniel moved with such precision in the garage, why his hands didn't shake, why fear never paralyzed him. Experience had forged him in the fires of loss. Trauma had honed his instincts, and grief had given him empathy, a sharp, intuitive awareness of what needed to be done in moments when every second counted. But there was more than skill in his actions. There was also a reckoning with the past. Every movement, every decision, every second spent stabilizing Cecilia Warren was, in its own way, a penance, a confrontation with the helplessness he had felt all those years ago. And yet, the process was complicated by the layers of secrecy he had built around himself. No one knew his past. No one understood that the quiet janitor they ignored for years had once commanded emergency rooms and disaster zones. To reveal himself now would invite questions he wasn't ready to answer. But the child's trust demanded it. Laya's belief in him bypassed skepticism, bypassed doubt. She needed him, and he could not fail. As he walked through the empty corridor, memories flashed. Emily's birthday party, Miriam's soft voice telling him to take a break, the long walks in the park, the tiny footsteps following him around the house. Each memory was a dagger, a reminder of what he had lost, yet also a fuel, a drive to act, to save, to make the moments that remained count for someone else. Daniel knew one truth. Grief could paralyze, but it could also catalyze. And in this moment, grief was his catalyst. He paused at a window overlooking the city, the lights shimmering like fractured stars. The world was alive, chaotic, dangerous, and somewhere out there, the men who had attacked the Warren family were plotting, waiting. Daniel didn't know their motives yet, but he understood something fundamental. Evil often thrives where vigilance falters. And he could not afford to falter, not now, not ever again. It was in that quiet reflection that he made a silent vow. He would protect Cecilia Warren. He would protect Laya. And if necessary, he would confront the ghosts of his past, including his own failures, to do it. Because grief, Daniel had learned, was not a chain. It was a test. It could crush or it could fortify, and he would not allow it to crush him again. Every life Daniel had touched, every patient he had saved, had been practice for this moment. Every failure, every loss, every tear he had cried alone in the dark, had prepared him for the impossible task ahead, defending a family, confronting violent forces, and reconciling a hidden life with a heroic present. The irony was not lost on him. A man who had once been defined by the lives he saved in operating rooms now found himself defined by the lives he could save in hallways, garages, and boardrooms. The context had changed, but the stakes were the same. Life and death hung in balance. And as he left the window, Daniel felt a strange mixture of fear, resolve, and cautious hope. The past would always be a shadow at his shoulder, but the present demanded action, clarity, and courage. For the first time in years, Daniel Carter, the man who had once walked away from life, felt alive again, alive with purpose, alive with urgency, alive with the weight of grief transformed into action. And that was exactly what Laya needed. As Daniel returned to the garage, ready to strategize the next steps, he noticed a subtle detail, a smudge on the floor, a discarded weapon. Someone had been closer than anyone realized. The past wasn't the only danger waiting in the shadows. The present had its own threats, and they were watching. The garage was quiet again, but the calm was deceptive. Daniel Carter had learned over years in trauma wards and emergency rooms that quiet always meant danger. He could sense it in the faint vibrations through the concrete floor, the whisper of air moving unnaturally, the subtle click of metal somewhere in the shadows. Laya had calmed down, her small hand gripping his tightly, but the child's wide eyes darted to the corners of the garage. Something in her intuition screamed the same thing Daniel already knew. They were not alone. The moment stretched, each tick of time a hammer pounding against nerves. Daniel crouched, hands ready, eyes scanning, muscles coiled. Every scenario ran through his mind at once. The attackers were smart, coordinated, and desperate. And desperation always made people dangerous. Then he saw it. A shadow moving against the far wall, subtle, calculated. He froze, every fiber of his being screaming for action, and then it happened. A door at the back of the garage burst open, and 3 figures stormed in. Their faces obscured by masks, their intentions unmistakable. Daniel's heartbeat accelerated, but his movements were automatic. Every memory of operating rooms, of accident sites, of chaotic trauma wards kicked in. He knew what needed to be done before the attackers even realized he was a threat. "Stay behind me," he whispered to Laya, his voice calm but sharp, commanding. She nodded, trust absolute, eyes wide but steady. The attackers advanced, brandishing blunt weapons. The first man swung a metal pipe. Daniel sidestepped with a precision honed from years of life and death crises. He grabbed the attacker's arm mid-swing, twisted it, and sent him crashing into a metal shelving unit. The sound of shattering plastic and metal echoed, a warning to the others, but there was no time to celebrate. The second attacker lunged, more cautious, more precise. Daniel ducked low, pivoted, and with a move born of countless hours in surgery, redirected the force of the blow back toward the man. Pain flashed across the assailant's face, but Daniel didn't pause. He couldn't. The garage became a blur of movement. Pipes, shadows, footsteps, shouts, metallic clangs. The air vibrated with tension, each second stretching into eternity. And through it all, Laya remained at his side, small but fearless, her hand gripping his like a lifeline. Daniel's mind moved faster than the chaos around him. He assessed, anticipated, and executed. Every motion was deliberate. Every action calculated. Every second mattered. One attacker tried to flank him. Daniel anticipated, pivoted, and tripped him with a precise sweep of his leg. The man hit the concrete floor hard, groaning. Another raised a wrench high, aiming for Daniel's head. Instinct took over. Daniel ducked, grabbed the man's wrist, and twisted. A sickening snap followed. The man crumpled, incapacitated. But it wasn't enough. The final attacker was smarter, quicker, and fueled by desperation. He lunged at Laya. Daniel's heart skipped. Time slowed. In a blur, he shoved Laya behind him and intercepted the blow. The metal bat struck Daniel's shoulder, sending pain lancing through him, but he absorbed it, using the momentum to drive the man backward. It was a fight that seemed endless, a battle of skill, courage, and sheer willpower. Daniel's knowledge of the human body became a weapon. He aimed precisely, incapacitating without unnecessary cruelty. Every strike, every move minimized risk to Laya. At one point, he used the environment against them. Shelves, boxes, and equipment became shields, barriers, and tools. He threw a wrench across the floor, tripping an attacker. He kicked a stack of crates, sending them tumbling to block another's path. The garage became a chessboard, and Daniel played every piece with deadly accuracy. Laya watched, eyes wide, silently absorbing the precision and courage of the man who had stepped into danger without hesitation. And Daniel saw her fear, her trust, and it fueled him further. Every life he had saved in the past had prepared him for this. But this fight had stakes beyond skill. This was about protecting innocence, defending life and confronting human malice head-on. Then, just as the fight seemed to reach its peak, a sudden sound, a high-pitched alarm from the security system, blared through the garage. One attacker panicked, rushing for the door. Daniel seized the moment. With a swift motion, he blocked the exit, forcing the man back into the fray. The final confrontation was brutal. Daniel dodged, parried, and countered, his hands and body moving with the fluidity of someone who had spent a lifetime navigating chaos. The attacker lunged one last time, aiming for Laya, and Daniel intercepted, twisting the man to the floor with precision. The man struggled, but Daniel immobilized him with a hold that required strength, skill, and absolute control. Silence fell. Heavy, deafening silence. The remaining attackers were incapacitated. Daniel stood, chest heaving, sweat and blood mixing on his skin. He looked down at Laya. "Are you okay?" he asked softly. She nodded, eyes shining, voice trembling. "You saved me." Daniel's hands, once instruments of surgical precision, now bore the marks of battle. Cuts, bruises, and abrasions testified to the intensity of the confrontation. Yet there was no time to dwell. Cecilia's condition still demanded urgent attention. He moved to her side, checking her vitals, stabilizing her injuries. The attackers were restrained, but the danger lingered. Someone had orchestrated this attack, and Daniel knew it was only the beginning. Whoever wanted the Warrens harmed was bold, calculating, and relentless. As he worked, his mind raced. He had to think ahead, anticipate the next move, and prepare for what was coming. But for now, he had done what mattered most. He had protected Laya and ensured Cecilia survived the immediate threat. The garage, once a scene of quiet tension, now hummed with residual adrenaline. Daniel wiped the sweat from his brow, glanced at Laya, and felt an unspoken bond form between them. She trusted him completely, and he, in turn, had discovered a renewed sense of purpose. The attackers, unconscious or immobilized, were a warning. The real danger awaited outside these walls, and Daniel knew the confrontation would escalate. But for now, he had proven, both to himself and to the world, that he was not just a janitor. He was a protector, a hero in disguise, and a man shaped by loss, trauma, and experience. And in the quiet aftermath, as emergency services sirens approached in the distance, Daniel realized something profound. Life would always bring challenges, danger, and uncertainty. But courage, skill, and heart could tip the scales. And in moments like this, those qualities weren't just admirable. They were life-saving. The attack was over, but the story was just beginning. The first wail of sirens cut through the thick tension in the garage. Daniel caught his ears, barely registered it, his mind laser-focused on Cecilia Warren, lying motionless on the concrete floor. The scene of violence had left bruises, blood, and chaos, but none of that mattered now. What mattered was survival, Cecilia's and, by extension, Laya's. Daniel knelt beside Cecilia, assessing her condition in a blur of practiced efficiency. His hands moved with precision and certainty, a stark contrast to the panic in Laya's wide eyes. The 6-year-old clung to his arm, small fingers digging into his sleeve, watching every movement as if Daniel were a magician weaving a life-saving spell. Cecilia. "Breathe for me," he commanded softly, checking her airway. Her lips were pale, pulse weak. Daniel's heart raced, but he forced calm into every motion. Panic was a luxury he couldn't afford. He opened the emergency kit he always kept tucked in his janitor's cart, a precaution he had learned from years of witnessing sudden tragedy. Bandages, antiseptics, trauma shears, and a portable oxygen mask were laid out meticulously, ready for battle. It was a janitor's cart, yes, but today, it was a mobile trauma station. Daniel gently tilted Cecilia's head, clearing her airway. A faint gurgle escaped her throat. Relief flashed, but there was no time to celebrate. Internal bleeding, possible fractures, shock, every second mattered. He pressed a hand firmly on a deep bruise forming along her side. The pressure was deliberate, calculated. Too much could worsen the damage. Too little would be ineffective. Laya's voice trembled. Will she be okay?" Daniel met her gaze, giving a small, reassuring nod. "She's strong. But we need to work fast." Time seemed to stretch as Daniel worked. His mind raced through protocols, trauma sequences, and improvisations, all at once. He stabilized her neck, applying a cervical collar from his kit. He checked her pulse, monitored breathing, and whispered instructions to Laya, turning her terror into focus. "Hold her hand," he instructed. "Tell her she's safe. She needs your calm, Laya." Laya obeyed, brushing the child's fingers over Cecilia's trembling hand. For the first time since the attack, Cecilia's lips moved in a weak, almost imperceptible smile. Daniel took it as confirmation. They were still in the fight. The sound of approaching footsteps made him glance up. Emergency personnel were arriving, but Daniel knew that in these critical first moments, he was still the most qualified. Years of trauma experience were priceless here, where every breath, every pressure point, every movement could tip the balance between life and death. He gave quick, precise orders. "Bring a stretcher. Step back, give her room. Keep the crowd away." The paramedics hesitated. They knew this was more than a simple scene. Daniel's skill was evident, almost unnerving in its precision. One looked at him with skepticism, but Daniel's gaze silenced it immediately. There was authority in his calm, a silent command forged in countless ER crises. As they prepared to move Cecilia, Daniel applied a temporary splint to her leg, which had a visibly unnatural angle from the fall. He monitored oxygen saturation, adjusted bandages, and reassured Laya at every turn. The child had been terrified moments ago, but now, seeing Daniel's steady hands, she began to believe. A rush of adrenaline surged through Daniel. He wasn't a bystander anymore. Every skill he had hidden behind a janitor's facade was now weaponized in the fight for life. Then, a sudden cough from Cecilia. Daniel's head snapped up. Her eyes fluttered open, panic momentarily crossing her features. "Daniel, they—" She struggled to speak. I know, he soothed, pressing a gentle hand on her shoulder. "You're safe now. I've got you." Tears streamed down Laya's face as she whispered, "Daddy." "Daddy's hurt." Daniel clenched his jaw, acknowledging the unspoken horror. Alexander Warren's life was still in jeopardy upstairs, in the lavish house where the real danger had begun. But here, in the garage, he had Cecilia. He had stabilized her, and that small victory mattered. The paramedics lifted Cecilia carefully, guided by Daniel's precise instructions. He rode with them in the ambulance, hands never leaving her side, eyes scanning monitors, adjusting oxygen, murmuring reassurance. Laya sat close, small and trembling, yet anchored by his presence. Every stoplight, every bump in the road felt amplified. Daniel's hands checked pulse, respiration, and bandages repeatedly. He counted each second in his head, calculating interventions and anticipating complications. This wasn't theory. This was life, raw and immediate. At the hospital, Daniel coordinated with the ER team, explaining injuries, vital signs, and the precise trauma mechanisms. The medical staff listened, some in awe, some skeptical, but none questioning his authority. He was no longer just a janitor. He was a savior in disguise. a man whose ordinary facade concealed extraordinary competence. Laya held Cecilia's hand through every procedure, whispering encouragement. Daniel guided her gently. Tell her she's strong. She's going to fight, hours blurred. Daniel remained vigilant, eyes never leaving the monitors. Surgeons worked on internal injuries, stabilized fractures, and treated bruising. Daniel coordinated with nurses, advocating for every precaution, every detail. Finally, the chaos eased. Cecilia was stabilized, sedated, and resting. Daniel allowed himself a breath, but there was no triumph in his chest, only relief and a sharpened awareness that Alexander Warren's fate still hung in the balance. Laya turned to him, small arms wrapping around his waist. Thank you for saving Mommy. Daniel knelt, embracing her. You helped too, he said softly. Your courage made a difference. The child's tears mingled with relief. In that moment, the bond between them solidified. Trust had been tested and proven, and yet Daniel knew this was far from over. The attackers had been organized, deliberate, and dangerous. Whoever had orchestrated this attack wanted more than just chaos. They wanted control, leverage, fear. But Daniel also knew something else. Skill, courage, and heart were a formidable combination. He had already defied expectation. He had saved life against all odds. And now, he was preparing for the next phase of a confrontation that would expose secrets, reveal true courage, and challenge the boundaries of what anyone thought possible. Even in exhaustion, even in the wake of trauma, Daniel's resolve strengthened. There would be no compromise when life was at stake. No hesitation when innocence was threatened. No fear when courage demanded action. Cecilia rested. Laya clung to hope, and Daniel prepared. The next battle was coming, and this time, it would extend beyond the garage, beyond the ambulance, beyond the hospital walls. But one thing was certain. In moments of crisis, Daniel Carter had proven he was not just a janitor. He was a guardian, a master of life-saving skill, and a man whose hidden depths would shock everyone who ever underestimated him. And as dawn approached, casting golden light across the sterile hospital floor, Daniel quietly vowed he would protect them, no matter the cost. The Warren Enterprises boardroom gleamed in morning light. Every surface polished, every chair perfectly aligned. It was a palace of power, a stage for billionaires, executives, and polished egos. Yet today the room was anything but ordinary. Laya, still clutching her mother's hand, stepped lightly behind Daniel. The child's small stature contrasted sharply with the imposing board members seated around the massive mahogany table. Each executive's eyes flicked nervously between the unexpected visitors, sensing disruption, but none could predict the storm about to unfold. Daniel stood tall, calm, and collected. He was no longer merely the janitor the Warren family and staff had casually ignored. Today, he carried evidence, courage, and the authority born of action. Good morning, he began, his voice steady, resonant. I'm here to explain exactly what happened to Alexander Warren yesterday, and to make sure those responsible are held accountable. The room shifted uncomfortably. Gasps and murmurs rippled among the board members. Several tried to mask their unease, but Daniel's presence and the weight behind his words made pretension impossible. A board member cleared his throat. Excuse me. Who are you exactly? Daniel fixed him with a calm stare. I am Daniel Carter. You may know me as the janitor who maintains this building. But yesterday, I became the person who saved Alexander Warren's life after he was attacked. And I have proof of who orchestrated the assault. Whispers spread like wildfire. A few staff members exchanged anxious glances, realizing the mundane man they dismissed for years now held the power of revelation. Laya tugged at Daniel's sleeve. Daddy, what proof? She whispered, eyes wide. Daniel crouched slightly, meeting her gaze. The proof is in the evidence I've gathered. Names, timelines, and recordings that leave no doubt about what happened. We're not just talking speculation, we're talking undeniable truth. He turned back to the board, producing a sleek tablet. With a swipe, security footage from the night of the attack filled the massive screen. Faces, actions, and sinister movements that had been hidden in shadow now glared in high-definition clarity. Executives shifted in their seats, some blanching as they recognized familiar figures on the footage. This footage shows exactly who orchestrated the attack on Mr. Warren, Daniel explained. It shows the timing, the entry points, and the attempts to bypass security. And yes, it implicates people in this very room who were supposed to protect him. The room erupted, some in denial, some in fear. One man coughed, adjusting his tie nervously. That can't be. It must be doctored, Daniel shook his head. You can question it all you like. But the evidence is backed by timestamps, multiple angles, and verified logs from the security system. This isn't fiction. This is reality, and reality has a way of catching up to those who think they are untouchable. At that moment, Alexander Warren himself entered the room, supported by a nurse. His face bore the pale hue of trauma, yet his eyes burned with a new clarity. The room went silent. No one expected him so soon, and the impact of his presence added weight to Daniel's revelation. Is this true? Alexander's voice was firm but tired, cutting through the tension. Were my own people trying to harm me? Daniel nodded solemnly. It is true, sir. And I was able to save you because I acted immediately. The delay from others could have been fatal. Shock, horror, and disbelief rippled through the boardroom. Faces paled. Some executives tried to justify themselves. Others lowered their eyes in shame. The power dynamic had shifted irrevocably. One man finally spoke, voice trembling. We were trying to protect the company's interests. It wasn't personal, Daniel's gaze hardened. You call an attempt on a man's life a protection of interests? That's not strategy, that's criminal. And justice does not negotiate with intent. It judges action. Alexander stepped forward, leaning slightly on the nurse. His voice, though still weakened, carried the authority of a man who had faced mortality. Daniel, you acted when no one else would. You didn't just save my life, you exposed the truth. And now, those responsible will answer. Laya watched in awe, gripping her mother's hand tightly. Her eyes darted between Daniel and her father, recognizing the man who had quietly become her hero. She felt pride and relief, the perfect mix for a child who had witnessed bravery and truth firsthand. The boardroom was now a theater of reckoning. Daniel presented detailed documents, digital footprints, and correspondence that left no room for denials. Each piece of evidence revealed the scope of conspiracy. Who had bribed security personnel? Who had disabled cameras? Who had coordinated the attack? The truth was inescapable. Executives shifted in their seats, realizing the extent of their exposure. Legal advisors whispered urgently to one another, trying to assess damage control, but the moral weight of the revelation was overwhelming. Alexander finally addressed the room. These actions have consequences. Some of you will face termination, investigation, and legal action. But one man saved my life when all others hesitated. His gaze met Daniel's. And I owe him more than gratitude. I owe him my trust, my support, and my recognition. Daniel shook his head, refusing any immediate accolades. I don't need thanks, sir. What matters is that justice is served, and that no one else suffers because of negligence or greed. That is enough. The boardroom's atmosphere had transformed completely. Where there had been arrogance and calculated ambition, now stood accountability and truth. The very men and women who had underestimated Daniel's quiet presence were now witnessing his authority, earned not by title but by courage, skill, and moral clarity. Laya's small voice broke the tension. Daddy, he's our hero, right? Daniel knelt beside her, smiling faintly. Yes, Laya. Heroes don't always wear capes. Sometimes they carry a mop or a first aid kit and a determination to do what's right. The room remained silent, everyone processing the reality that a janitor, someone deemed ordinary and insignificant, had upended their hierarchy, revealed corruption, and saved the life of a billionaire. It was a reversal so dramatic, so unexpected, that it had all the hallmarks of a viral story, one that would ripple far beyond the walls of Warren Enterprises. As Alexander and Daniel reviewed the steps to secure justice, board members realized they were no longer in control. Power had shifted to action, courage, and undeniable truth. And Daniel, the man they had overlooked, now embodied the ultimate authority of life, morality, and accountability. By the time the meeting concluded, several key executives had resigned, others faced immediate investigation, and the entire company had a newfound respect for the quiet man who had acted decisively. The news would spread like wildfire. The janitor who saved a billionaire revealed a conspiracy and became a symbol of courage and justice in one day. Laya tugged Daniel's sleeve again. "Can we go see Mommy now?" Daniel smiled, ruffling her hair gently. "Yes, sweetheart. We've done our part here. Now it's time to be together." Alexander stepped forward, placing a hand on Daniel's shoulder. "You've proven yourself beyond measure. This company and my family will always be in your debt." Daniel nodded, humility intact but confidence unwavering. He had stepped into chaos, confronted danger, and emerged not just as a savior, but as a force that demanded respect. And outside the gleaming windows of the boardroom, the world continued, unaware of the quiet janitor who had become a hero. But inside, a family was whole, justice had been served, and a child had witnessed bravery in its purest form, a story that would linger in memory, heart, and viral headlines for years to come. The sun rose over the city with a gentle golden glow, casting warmth across the streets that had long seen hardship and struggle. Among these streets, a transformation was quietly underway, one that would ripple far beyond the walls of Warren Enterprises and the confines of the boardroom. Daniel Carter, once the unnoticed janitor, now stood at the helm of something extraordinary. The day had started like any other, yet it carried the weight of history. The moment when courage, empathy, and action had changed lives forever. He looked at the empty lot before him, envisioning a space not just of bricks and mortar, but of hope, growth, and community. Beside him, Laya's eyes sparkled with anticipation. She was clutching her father's hand tightly, the 6-year-old who had been the catalyst for revelation, the bearer of truth, and the spark that ignited a chain of life-altering events. "Daddy, will kids really come here?" she asked, voice soft but filled with wonder. Alexander Warren, still recovering from the attack but radiating quiet determination, stepped forward with a smile. "Not just kids, Laya. This place will be for anyone who needs a safe space, education, and support. Because of you, Daniel, and because of your courage, this community will have a second chance." Daniel's jaw tightened with emotion, but he maintained composure. "It's not just about charity," he said. "It's about empowerment. These kids need guidance, mentorship, and a place to feel safe, a place where their dreams aren't dismissed before they even begin." The construction crew moved with practiced efficiency, but the atmosphere was unlike any ordinary work site. Local children peeked through fences, curious and wide-eyed, while parents whispered excitedly about the promise of a new chapter for their neighborhoods. Volunteers from across the city had arrived, eager to help paint walls, plant gardens, and contribute however they could. The excitement was palpable. A community mobilized by hope, bravery, and the story of a man who refused to stand idly by. Laya skipped ahead, her small hands gripping a paintbrush far too large for her frame. "I want to paint the stars!" she shouted, determination shining through her youthful exuberance. Daniel chuckled, crouching beside her. "Stars are perfect. They'll remind everyone that even in darkness, there's always light." Alexander joined them, kneeling with the child as she carefully painted a golden star on the wall. "This is more than art," he said. "This is a symbol of resilience, hope, and the fact that one person's courage can change everything." The community center was not just a building. It was a manifestation of human determination and compassion. Classrooms were equipped with bright bookshelves, computers, and educational materials. TA Library Corner was designed for storytelling sessions, where children could explore worlds beyond their own. The gymnasium echoed with laughter and energy, while outdoor gardens promised lessons in patience, growth, and responsibility. Local reporters began to arrive, drawn by the story of the janitor who saved a billionaire and exposed a conspiracy. Cameras captured Daniel painting alongside Laya, Alexander overseeing construction, and children eagerly running through the space that would soon be theirs. Headlines practically wrote themselves. "Janitor turned hero opens community center for city's children." From boardroom to neighborhood, Daniel Carter's legacy of courage. The child who saved a billionaire inspires a city. Yet Daniel remained grounded. He refused interviews, preferring to focus on the tangible impact of his work. "This isn't about me," he told one reporter gently. It's about giving children the tools they need to succeed, the guidance they deserve, and the space to dream freely. If my story inspires one child to stand up, speak out, or act with courage, then it has done its job. As weeks passed, the community center flourished. Workshops in technology, arts, and sports were introduced. Mentorship programs connected professionals with eager young minds, creating opportunities that had once been unimaginable. Laya, of course, became the center's little mascot. Her enthusiasm infectious, reminding everyone of the power of innocence and courage. One afternoon, as the sun dipped low and painted the sky in shades of pink and gold, Daniel and Alexander stood on the balcony overlooking the children playing below. "Do you ever think," Alexander asked thoughtfully, "that a single moment, the courage of one person, can truly ripple outward and change a city?" Daniel nodded. "I've seen it. Laya's courage, her innocence, her honesty. It reminded me why we act, why we fight for what's right. And now this center will carry that ripple forward for years to come." Alexander smiled. "You've not just saved a life, Daniel. You've changed a community, and somehow, I think you've saved me too. Not just from an attack, but from the complacency that sometimes comes with wealth." Laya ran up to them, cheeks flushed from play. "Daddy, Daniel, come see the mural we finished." The wall was a vibrant explosion of color, depicting children reaching for stars, books floating in the sky, and golden rays illuminating smiling faces. It was more than art. It was a declaration of possibility, a tangible symbol of hope and perseverance. Daniel crouched beside her, brushing a stray streak of paint from her cheek. "It's beautiful, Laya, just like you." Alexander, observing the scene, felt a profound sense of gratitude. All of this, it's proof that bravery, honesty, and compassion create more impact than any boardroom decision ever could. Community leaders began collaborating with the center, launching scholarship programs, educational drives, and local support initiatives. Stories of transformation emerged. Children who had once been struggling with school, violence, or neglect now found purpose, mentorship, and safety. Parents spoke of newfound hope, and the city slowly began to change, one family at a time. The media coverage, of course, continued, but Daniel's focus never wavered. He was driven not by fame, but by the tangible evidence of change. A child reading her first book, a young teen coding her first program, a group of neighbors planting a shared garden together. Each small victory reinforced the ultimate truth. Heroism is not measured by wealth, title, or recognition, but by courage, action, and heart. Months later, during the center's grand opening, a celebration brought the entire neighborhood together. Music played, laughter filled the air, and the spirit of community thrived. Daniel, Alexander, Laya, and the staff stood at the entrance, greeting families and children, witnessing the fruits of a vision born from crisis and courage. A journalist approached Daniel once more. "Do you ever think about how this all started? One night, a child running to you in fear?" Daniel looked at Laya, who was now painting tiny stars on everyone's hands, her laughter ringing out clear and pure. "Every day. That moment reminded me why we act when it matters most. Because courage begets courage, and hope begets hope. One act can create a lifetime of change." As the sun set, painting the sky in breathtaking shades of orange and purple, Daniel felt a sense of peace he had never known. The janitor who had saved a billionaire, exposed corruption, and confronted danger, had now built a legacy of hope, inspiration, and empowerment. And in the laughter of children, the gratitude of families, and the pride in Laya's bright eyes, he saw proof that heroism, true, transformative heroism, never goes unnoticed. And as the city around them slept that night, dreams of possibility, courage, and community flourished in every home, every child's imagination, and every heart touched by the story of a man who acted when it mattered most.